a principal reason that we're still here awaiting a new highway bill is that we have done a poor job educating and reaching out to the public to talk to people in ways that they can relate to about the importance of transportation infrastructure. So that said, you're focusing pretty much on tolling. How long do you think this campaign will go on? Do you already have a budget for it? And how much do you want to share with us about what you think it will cost?
I'm glad you asked me about the budget because I'd love to have you. You guys are great members of IBTTA, and I'll contact you later about the specific amount. But yes, we do have a budget. We do have a budget. Yep. Where is it going to go? You know, I can't predict from today, you know, what it's going to look like 3 years from now. But in my view, it's going to be forever. We are going to have a strong launch this year, and then we're going to continue this until we get to the goal that I talked about, until the butterfly comes through the hole. Yes.
I like your message. I guess I've always viewed transportation as a utility. It allows you to do the things you need to do or want to do. And I was involved in the BRAC recently. Ed Weiner did a TRB report on that, and that was the missing utility in BRAC. Built the building, the people, telecommunications, sewer, water, everything except the transportation. And I think our message has been gas tax, gas tax, gas tax. And when you look at all of the cell phones and everything gas, electric that we pay for, the issue is paying ourselves for good transportation. And I think you're getting at that message. There's thousands of people in the Baltimore region that pay the toll every day to go through those bridges and tunnels. We're starting to do that in Montgomery County on the Intercounty Connector. But again, I think we lock into this gas tax, increasing the gas tax, and we don't say pay ourselves for good transportation. Well, when gas is low, which it was after the president got in, it was $1.49 in Laurel and $1.57 in California. We had stimulus step one. Step two would have been raise the gas tax, then replenish the trust fund, and then spend two years or so to negotiate a long-term bill. But I think those are the things we miss. It's like paying ourselves for good transportation, and people are willing to do it. They do ride toll facilities. They argue about it, but when it's there, they see the value of it, and they're willing to ride it and pay for it. So I think you got a terrific message there.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for your comment. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you very much. Yes?
Do you have a position on what to do with the federal funding for the federal transit program in this process?
That was going to be my next question.
That's a good question. I love transit. I think transit is essential. We need lots of modes. And, when APT is here, ask them about it.
Just on that point, though, a few years back, we had 12 firms from around the world come in and tell us they were willing to do I-270, either as managed toll lanes, it was an informational request for information, or as a toll road. But they also said they would be willing to pave a busway,
Right.
a few, a mile or two off that 270.
Right.
We want to run it, but they were willing to pave it, and it would have given us both the widening of 270 as managed lanes to match what Virginia's doing, and then give us a busway where we could have gone in for just the buses, but not a new start. It was just an equipment request. So there's flexibility. I was going to ask you that question. Any benefit for transit facilities?
Let me be a little bit more less flippant about my response. Forgive me for being so flippant, because we do have members in which transit and tolling are inextricably interrelated. I mean, you look at the express lanes in San Diego, that were created for the express purpose of creating, bus rapid transit. You look at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, MTA Bridges and Tunnels, in the New York metropolitan area, provide tremendous financial support for transit systems in those communities. And they see themselves as a metropolitan area, as a system. You can't get more than something like 300,000 vehicles across the George Washington Bridge in a day. So you've got to have buses going, you can't just have them all be automobiles. You need buses, you need the subways, and they recognize that. So, and there are other, systems in Tampa. The Tampa-Hillsborough Expressway Authority, with the reversible lanes, is intimately involved in transit. So there's lots of synergies between transit and tolling. When Bill Millar was over at APTA, he and I, worked on common issues all the time. So, yes, the answer is yes. I'm very supportive. I'm not going to comment on what's, in the bill with respect to transit, but I think it's one of the most important parts of our transportation system, and we've got to, we need to have alternatives to just being in an automobile. David.
Thank you very much for a very stimulating speech. And I think to look for evidence that the present system is dead, one need not go further than the fact that Congress is unwilling to raise the fuel tax to support the transport improvements that it thinks are necessary. However, my question to you is this. You mentioned the National Financing Commission. As I understand it, they were appointed to find out ways to replace the fuel tax as a way of financing transport or transportation, as the natives call it here. They therefore wrote the report in such a way as to say that the revenues from this new method would go to Washington. My question is, do you think that is a good idea? When we have new systems enabling people to pay for roads, should the money go to the center to be redistributed? Should the monies that people pay for tolls then be sent to Washington to be put into the mix and to be allocated in accordance with the wisdom of the politicians and administrators in Washington?
Great question. Well, my personal opinion is that the wisdom on how to spend transportation dollars is greater and more appropriate the closer you get to where those dollars are spent. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't have a federal program. I think we should have a federal program. I think there is a national program and a national interest. I'm not prepared to define that for you here. I think there are a lot smarter people than I am who could define what the federal and national interest is. But I think there are wonderful things happening in the states and in localities and in counties, and we should let 1,000 flowers bloom there.
Pat, I want to ask a little bit more about how to define the message, and I know this is something you're working on. As you know, the Miller Center, I guess, will have a report out this month, beginning of May. Also, grappling Governor Belial's obviously very interested in this whole question of messaging, as you spoke quite eloquently to him about that. But I wonder sometimes, struggle sometimes, what are the public opinions we're trying to influence and change? I mean, it is kind of the adequacy and sustainability of funding. To be sure, there is, I think we've probably talked about together the question of, obviously the crumbling infrastructure argument hasn't worked very well in the public, certainly not at the national level. In some cases it has obviously worked at the state and local level where people can see these things. But the crumbling infrastructure hasn't. We have many members of Congress who dismiss the word quote-unquote investment as just another word for quote-unquote spending. When I think it's fair to say everybody in this room recognizes, anybody who's been in the business, you know, the private sector understands there is a difference between expenditures and capital investment. But somehow that hasn't permeated the public process, again, at the national level. So what are we focused here? I also would add one thing, and I wasn't here when Janet spoke, but I don't know that she mentioned this, but Janet, I think many of us heard Janet describe some of the focus groups the chamber ran, in which people expressed the view that there is a need, but there's plenty of money being raised, it's all being stolen, misspent, etc. I.e., it grows out of this whole broad sense of distrust of public agencies, of government, that you can't do anything right, you're stealing the money, so I'm not going to give you any more money. You got enough already. So, what do you see as the key messages we're trying to focus on?
I'm going to answer you by speaking about the messengers as opposed to the messages. I think there may be a little bit of interest group fatigue in this town. You know, it's one thing for me to go to the Congress, or for John Horsley or Pete Ruane or, you know, any association head or executive to go there and say, this is what we need to do. This is what you need to do. It's an entirely different thing when their constituents are saying, we are dying out here, you know? We need flexibility, we need tools, we need innovation, you know, we need people to get out of our way, you know? We know you have good intentions, but, you know, some of these good intentions have led to restrictions and, you know, tangled webs that don't allow us to, you know, fight with both fists, all right? So our approach is going to be to galvanize and, you know, set on fire those voices, because I think they're going to be much more effective and more powerful than the guys that have been in their jobs for 10 or 20 years and do this for a living.
Pat, yeah, that was great talk. Loved it as a communications person. I love the metaphors that you use. In terms of galvanizing those voices, though, those voices, you know, there's been efforts previously to galvanize them, to get that energized. There has to be a value proposition. There has to be in various groups, various individuals, there has to be something that is going to ring their bell and say, I am going to stand up and do this. And I'm interested to know what your thoughts are in order to get that motivation going. You're going to have to be offering. You know, the time savings is the obvious thing here. You know, you're going to be able to get to your soccer games and so forth by providing safe, efficient roads. But have you thought with your campaign of how you get to motivating those direct voices?
Like you, I'm very interested in finding out what we're going to do. And it's going to, we're in the beginning. We're in the very beginning of this, and it's starting with research so that we understand what it is that winds the watch and lights the fire of these people. We assume we know. You know, in many cases, we assume we know what excites them. You know, we throw big numbers up there like $2 trillion over 5 years, you know, and the roads are crumbling and this is terrible and, you know, please help us. And people have glazed looks on their faces, you know. But when we say trying to drive 7 miles to get to the lunch and can't get there, you know, when we use metaphors like, you know, there is the equivalent of a brownout every day on the Capitol Beltway in the morning and the evening rush hour. You know, would we tolerate that with Pepco and Virginia Power? Would we tolerate a 2-hour brownout every day? So we're going to learn. We have to ask. We have to interrogate people and find out what really upsets you, what really excites you. And then we'll do the messages.
It's falling trees. I guess Pepco took the heat on all these trees falling on the lines. And, yeah, the state got on them, the county got on them. Maybe that's when you mentioned a tree down.
Yes, Kevin.
What are the basic politics of your industry? I assume it's nonpartisan. We have red states and blue states with lots of toll roads, and it seems to me that you never lose votes, close votes. It's always a committee chair of some committee stifles something before it ever sees the light of day. And how do you get beyond that reality? And am I right in that assessment that it isn't a thing that's
I don't know, and I don't know. Much more to learn. Much more to learn, Kevin. Anybody else?
Well, let me add, I guess, a comment. It seems as though the next program, your industry's going to play a bigger part, no matter how you cut it. But it's really, and yet, I think most state DOTs that don't manage high toll roads themselves kind of see you as someone else. I don't see a real coalition. The highway and transit people, I think, are working closer together than the highway and toll people. And I may have that wrong, but just the impression.
Yeah, if you have the impression, there's probably an element of truth to that. But we are trying to work more closely together with the AASHTOs and the ARTBAs and the APTAs and all the people who are involved in transportation. And this is a collective thing where we are all struggling to find the right combination of forces that's going to move this thing. We think about transportation. In fact, the guy who wrote the governing article, one of the things he mentioned is the people who are transportation lobbyists and associations and interests in Washington, transportation, for them, it's at the top of the list. There isn't anything else, It's transportation or forget it. I don't want to hear about it. But that's not the same for most Americans and probably most people in Congress. So, and then the Congress, we look at the Congress, through our own prisms, and we say, well, this is the thing that's influencing them. But there's a whole range, there's a whole constellation of issues that are exerting pressure on them. And when I come in to talk about transportation, it's like, wait a minute, I've got, you're 27th on the list of 10 things to do. I'm worried about all these other things. So this is not a slam dunk. It's not a short-term thing. It's a long-term thing. And I think we all need to get engaged in this to figure out a way to understand which messengers are going to be most effective, understand what it is that motivates them, and divine and devise a strategy to, David, what's the word you like to use?
Orderly transition.
No, not orderly transition. It's like a galvanize, radicalize. There it is. We got to radicalize the base.
Consummate radical. Yes.
Radicalize the base. I use the word subversive. Deliberate. That our campaign is going to be subversive. I'm not talking about the overthrow of the government by force. That's a different word. That's treason. Subversive is undermining the established order of things, right? It's getting people to think about things in new ways. We should all be subversives, We've got to stop thinking about these things in the same old ways. We've got to take the glasses off, Biblical reference, Moses coming down, the veil from his eyes. We have to do this. Let's be subversive.
Glad you gave equal.
Yes.
Old Testament.
Yes.
I would be very interested, and I don't know if you can focus on this in your campaign or your research leading up to the campaign, but I've long thought that one of the reasons why folks might not vote their pocketbook or their convenience, however you want to describe it, because they all do realize if I can get somewhere 15 minutes quicker, spread out over the course of a year, those are all benefits to me. But I think there might be a thread of people feeling like it's inevitable that even if we get the capacity improvements that we want, there could be an accident. that's just going to tie up things. And that could happen every day. It's a series of expected expectations, individual events that just happen as a pattern. For instance, on your commute, there is construction. Well, that's what we're kind of lobbying more for. So people feel, yes, I'll pay for these improvements, but then I'm going to sit for 2 years while they make them, and then there's going to be an accident, and I'm still going to. So, well, fine, a year and 11 months. So I would be interested in seeing what research that can sort of find out about that feeling. Is it that they understand the economic argument and that they are passionate about it, but they also believe it's inevitable that I'm going to hit traffic at some point on a regular basis, even if we make capacity improvements, even if we improve, advocate for things like managed lanes, or we share a lot of the same membership on tolls. So this is not an indictment of making improvements one way or the other, but just on my way somewhere, other people are trying to get there and they're not a good driver and they get in accidents and they block up all the lanes. Then I have to reroute, and those routes aren't, people drive every day or they commute. This applies to transit, everything. They know that, I think there might be just sort of unfortunate exceptions of these things. And so research on that, and then also.
Like despair, right?
Yeah, just despair. I mean, and to look at the utilities, maybe you don't get that same despair, but in some places maybe you do.
Now let me just react to this a little bit. Congestion can be seen as a positive thing because it means there's economic activity. There's people want to go places. I mean, if you didn't see anybody ever, you'd wonder, well, what's going on? Where is everybody? But so you can look at it in a positive way. I mean, we don't want to have congestion all the time, everywhere. And I firmly believe that we can make things better, And part of the way of making things better is being that subversive, looking at things in a different way. We engineer in this country, we've got more signal engineers, and traffic and all this kind of stuff. And then you go to a place where they've developed these roundabouts, and there's no signage and there's no lights. And somehow people, in this low-tech way, people figure out a way, hey, this works better than Washington Circle at 5 p.m., right? So, we can make things better. Let's work, you and I get together on this.
And another thing, if you're going to be asking questions to folks, there are ways to engineer more safety or, collision avoidance things into our infrastructure that can help avoid some of those inevitable, exceptions that people, I think, have come to believe in.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Ultimately, who is the target audience here? Is it the general public? Is it public officials? I'm always lobbying folks in my neighborhood, folks I meet at in airports. The thing I find, the average person has no godly idea how transportation is paid for, right? They know there's a gas tax, but they have no idea where the money goes, how it's distributed. I would even venture to say probably at least a third of Congress has no concept of how this works. So ultimately, I guess, who are you trying to move here? Is it Congress? Is it state governments? Is it general public? Who?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure that's the right question. Who are we trying to move? Okay? I have this device that did not exist, 6 years ago, an iPhone, and now, umpty-ump tens or hundreds of millions of people have them, and studies have shown that there is like a love relationship between, the human beings who possess these things and these objects, So, did this change things? Yes, all right? I'm not interested necessarily in creating one of these, but I'm interested in creating something that's going to change things. I mean, it could be as simple as the Post-it note, you know? 40 years ago, nobody even in 3M had seen a Post-it note. And, you know, some guy, you heard the story about the choir guy and this glue and blah, 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 you know, marking his pages. Came up with a weak glue that turned out to create a great product. So they said, well, let's try, developing these things. And they handed them out around the company, and they sat on people's desks. It's like, what do I need this yellow pad of semi-sticky things for, you know? Then they went around and they showed people that, they had training sessions to show people how to use them, what it could be used for. And then they were able to sell it, okay? So that's, I'm anticipating this is a possible model, I don't necessarily know who, is the main audience. I would say everybody, everybody is going to have influence on transportation policy in some way. Let's develop our own intellectual Post-it note that people say, now I cannot live without this thing. And this thing is better mobility, it's user-funded transportation, it's pricing, it's alleviating congestion, it's doing transportation in a new and better way. It's our version of the Post-it note. Post-it note. Yeah, you could have told us.
That device you have, if you make it a little bigger that you can sit on it and put wheels on it, it will take you anywhere you want to go.
That's right.
It knows all
All right.
the pizza parlors.
Well, I think we're running out of time.